Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the What Are Employers Really Looking For webinar, hosted by the CMI Wales Board, organised in partnership with Swansea University final year students. My name is Natasha and I am an events coordinator at the CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Armin to begin this afternoon's event. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and CMI YouTube channel. Towards the end of the event, we'll be sharing an evaluation form in the chat. We would love to hear your feedback. Anyone who completes the form by 9 a.m. on Monday, the 29th of March, will receive a free CMI goodie bag and will also be entered into a prize draw for a £100 Amazon gift card. Now over to Armin, one of the final year students at Swansea University that have helped organise this event.
Thank you, Natasha. So good afternoon, everyone who has tuned in to the latest CMI Wales event, What Are Employers Really Looking For? In today's highly competitive job market, which became even worse thanks to all the COVID-19 pandemic, we can hear plenty of restructurings taking place across the industries. We're going to try and figure out what a successful candidate needs to make him stand out from the rest of the crowd. During the session, we will hear stories from each of our speakers of how they ended up where they are today, and lots of insightful recruitment-related tips. I would now like to start introducing our today's guests. It is my pleasure to welcome Sophie Galley, who is an early careers recruitment specialist at Turner & Townsend. So good afternoon, Sophie.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, I apologise. Hi, guys.
The following speaker, who is an engineering director covering United Kingdom and Ireland, Paul Gibbons. So good afternoon, Paul.
Good afternoon. Hope everyone's okay.
And last but not least, Nicola McNeely, who is a partner and head of technology sector at Harrison Clark Rickerbice. So good afternoon, Nicola.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone.
So I believe it would be an excellent time overall to begin with a brief introduction of yourselves so we could get to know you better. Nicola, shall I start with you?
Perfect, thank you. So I'm Nicola McNeely. I'm a partner in a law firm called Harrison Clark Rickerbice, and I'm the head of technology sector. So I'm responsible for looking after technology clients across all of our 9 offices in the UK. We have about 600 people in the law firm, so it's quite a big firm. And I'm one of the partners, so one of the most senior lawyers in the firm. I've been a lawyer for 25 years, and I've hired lots and lots of people, seen lots of CVs, seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and delighted to be talking to you guys today.
Lovely. That's great to hear. Paul?
I'm Paul Gibbons, and I'm the UK and Ireland Engineering Director for Hayes. So I cover the whole of the UK and Ireland from a technical and engineering perspective. We have around 3,500 staff, and we operate from about 105 offices around the UK. So yeah,
Lovely. And last but not least, Sophie.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sophie Galley. I lead the early careers recruitment for Turner & Townsend. We are a global consultancy firm, but I sort of specialise in the UK recruitment. UK sort of business side is around 3,000 people at the moment. We look to recruit over sort of 150 graduates a year, plus placement students, plus apprentices as well. And I sort of manage that process for the business. So we have a variety of different opportunities for sort of early careers talent. So yeah, I've worked within this sector now, I think it'll be 13 years. So I've got quite a lot of experience within sort of early careers and sort of how to be successful through those processes, and have obviously seen a lot of different CVs and a lot of different candidates over the years that I've worked within the industry.
Lovely. These were some great introductions. As you all can see, we have a variety of specialists across the industries here today. And I would now love to hear your thoughts about the organizational recruitment. So let us begin with a question of how you ended up where you are today, pretty much. So Nicola, shall we go with you?
Sure. So the legal profession is really tough. When I'm applying for training contracts, when I finished my postgraduate degree, there were probably about 2,000 applications for every 5 jobs in the marketplace. So really, really tough. And the market's still tough to this day. You've really got to stand out and be different and demonstrate that you're the right person to hire, because the caliber of the candidates and the applicants that we get is just exceptional. So you need to persuade us that you're the right person to hire. So when I got my first job, I had to first demonstrate that I had the right work experience and that I knew the right sort of law firm that I'd work for. So I managed to get that work experience through a number of different routes. So I did a bit of work in-house. I did a bit of temping work. So I worked as a legal secretary, and I worked as a receptionist in public sector organisations, and then managed to basically push my way into the legal services divisions and got some experience, because I didn't have family that were in the law, and it's a very elitist profession to this day. So I was fortunate to get that kind of experience, and I did some interesting stuff internationally, which just made my CV stand out a little bit, because it wasn't standing out from the crowd. So I really made sure that I'd done some interesting stuff. And then I applied for training contracts, got lots and lots of rejections, and eventually managed to find my first job. And that was over 25 years ago. So I've grown a law practice. I've grown and managed big teams of people, and have hired literally hundreds of people over the years. So I know what good looks like, and I know what bad looks like too.
That's a great story of what specifically the grit to get that job looks like, pretty much, and the whole road to it. Yeah, so the next would be Paul, if you could give us some brief background on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key thing for me really is that not everyone's career, it kind of flows from going to school to university to then going into a job, and I was kind of probably a prime example of that. Is that I obviously finished school, A levels, suddenly decided that I wanted to go into the Marines. So went obviously into the Marines. That was a great experience. Made me, I suppose the benefit that I got from that is made me appreciate a lot of things. It makes me appreciate the flexibility that you have. Came out of the Marines, decided it wasn't for me, and then moved into operational sales in London. I was working for Vodafone there as National Business Development Manager for those, but always had a passion to move into recruitment. I was a weapon engineer by trade within the Marines, so the whole technical and engineering kind of was a real good hit for me, and excited me. It was something that I was interested in. I love knowing how things work, and I'm one to watch it inside the factories and everything else. I am one of those people, unfortunately. But as I say, I ventured and managed, as most people say in recruitment, you kind of fall into recruitment. And I fell into it. Started off obviously from a low level, similar to the way Nicola said. You've got to kind of put yourself out there and kind of deliver what you said you would deliver. And then over the years, obviously, I've kind of ventured up that ladder. I've moved from funny enough, I've only worked for 3 people in my professional career, shall we say, one being the Marines, one being another smaller technical and engineering agency, and then moved to Hayes. So as I say, you know, throughout that period as well, I actually done my degree at the age of 25, as opposed to doing a degree when I'd automatically come out of school. So I think the key thing for me is that not every career is that straight line approach to kind of how you go about getting a job. It can be that kind of windy road along the way as well.
Yeah, that is some great experience overall that you have before you became director at Hayes specifically. The whole military experience before and how you ended up there, and did the degree at the age of 25, which is completely different nowadays. Most of the students go immediately after they graduate, finish their A levels, after they finish their A levels to the university. Yes, so Sophie, what was your road to where you are today?
Yeah, so I think I sort of, similar to sort of what Paul was saying, if I'm really honest, I sort of probably would say I fell into what I do now, but there is a sort of a bit of background story that sort of comes with that. So I graduated from university in 2008, which at that point, you know, similar to now, we were in quite a bit of a recession in terms of employment, and it was very, very difficult to find a role at that point, and everything was very, very competitive. And, you know, I did apply to some graduate programs, and I was unsuccessful with a lot of my applications because the market was very, very competitive at that stage. So what I ended up doing was I ended up going to work as a temp within the NHS, supporting within an admin role, is the only role I could find at that time. I sort of came out of university with a business management degree, and I felt like, you know, I should have had a lot of options, but I really, really struggled to find some sort of different opportunities because it was really hard at that time. So I decided to take the sort of the temp opportunity, thinking it would just sort of fill some time in terms of my, you know, looking for other opportunities and things like that. But the role I went to do was working for the NHS. And obviously, when you sort of get into organisations of that size, it really does open doors in terms of what's available, because you've got that experience on your CV of working for such a big organisation. And while I was sort of temping there, I did start to apply for more, you know, variety of different roles within the NHS, and managed to be successful in sort of getting a role working in sort of early careers recruitment, sort of very low level, sort of coordinator level. But I think it was just because I took that opportunity to take a temp role doing completely admin based work, which I didn't think was what I wanted to do, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. Yeah. But it sort of made me realise that within like a company like the NHS, if you do get given sort of a small opportunity to take something, it really worked out well for me. So I worked for the NHS after I started as a coordinator there for about 3 or 4 years within their graduate recruitment team. And after that, I left to go work for a really big grad recruiter called Teach First. And I sort of worked with them for about 5 or 6 years, I think it was. And I sort of managed a lot of their recruitment in terms of different university engagement and looking at ways we can work with different partnerships and things like that. So I had a whole host of different opportunities while I was there. And then after sort of six years there, I decided to try and do something slightly different. So I went to work for TfL, which obviously everyone's heard of TfL. And it was just more of an opportunity to sort of work within sort of a very different sector. So it was more engineering focused and sort of more surveying, those sort of roles that I was recruiting for at that point, just to sort of broaden my CV in terms of my experience. And also to get an understanding of how a different organisation works as well, because TfL is a very, very different organisation to a lot of other companies, just due to the scale of it and also how it delivers what it delivers, and with it sort of being funded by the public, as well as sort of, it's a confusing situation where that sort of sits. So I was there for about 2 years, and then I got the opportunity to go work at Turner and Townsend, which I did take because it was such a fantastic chance to go and work for a company at that point who were really growing. And I've been with Turner and Townsend now 4 years, and it's probably the best career move I made, because even though at the time I took the opportunity, they weren't necessarily as well established as they are now, it meant that I've been given some fantastic exposure. So the role I do now, I work with the UK board, people of that level, just due to sort of the nature of how the business has grown over the 4 years I've been there. So it was a bit of a risky move because it was a much smaller organisation that probably wasn't as well known as sort of something like TfL, but I decided to take the opportunity just because I thought it would be really good for my sort of career development, and it 100% has sort of paid off, because sort of the exposure I get now is absolutely fantastic, and the input I have with the recruitment that we deliver, you know, I wouldn't get that I don't think anywhere else, if I'm honest, because it's sort of grown in the 4 years. It's sort of changed so much. It's crazy what's happened. So yeah, we've been sort of a sort of whirlwind of a sort of career, but it was never what I wanted to do. And I think what I'd sort of say to anyone who's really struggling now is sometimes taking that really little opportunity that you think is just sort of short term can really, really pay off, because sometimes, you know, you might not think it's what you want to do, and it might not be long term, but it might just open a few more doors for you, because you get exposure to different people that will sort of help and support you develop in your career.
So that sounds good. So as everyone can hear, all of our speakers today had really different pathways. Some of them were completely different from what they were thinking they will do in the future, and they ended up where they are today in the end. The next question is, what was the most standout cover letter or CV that you've seen during your career? So maybe let's start with Nicola, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm going to mention two. So two candidates that I've hired over the years, and the things that stood out for me. So one was, again, a non-traditional route for a lawyer. So I like hiring people that have get up and go and want to do different things and show that they're entrepreneurial and they've got something about them. So one candidate had basically paid off all his student loans over the summer by creating an ice cream business. So he created an ice cream business and sold ice creams on a beach in Brighton, and made about £6,000 over the course of the summer selling ice cream. And that really impressed me, because just the logistics of trying to organize that and to find somewhere to keep the ice cream, to keep it secure and do it from a little mobile unit. And he did it completely off his own back and self-funded it. And I thought that was really smart, because it showed there was something about him that would make him entrepreneurial and business focused. So I hired him. And the second person actually was in the Marines, would you believe? So he started his career in the Marines, and was part of the Royal Marine Band that actually lived on the Royal Yacht Britannia. And I'd actually visited the Royal Yacht Britannia, so I'd seen the bunks in which he'd lived. And I was just fascinated by the fact that he'd done something so interesting and so different and diverse to being a lawyer. And I come from a military background. My father was in the Air Force, and my grandfather before me, and I was brought up in a military family. So I know the disciplines that brings, and I know that makes you super organized, very presentable, and all of the qualities that you get working in the military. So yeah, I hired him too.
So it teaches like plenty of discipline overall, the military field.
Well, it just demonstrated that there was something about them, and they had something interesting they'd done, because the amount of CVs that I've seen with people with firsts from Oxbridge, but they've got no work experience. They've never had a part-time job. They've never worked in a client-facing role. They've never operated a photocopier. They've never had a conversation with a client. And that is a disaster for me, because I need to know, one, I can work with this person. Two, I can put them in front of a client. Three, they're never going to embarrass me turning up at work hungover or looking presentable. And four, I can trust them. So if I give them something to do, I know they're going to do it, and I know they're going to deliver on time. And those qualities are hugely important. So anything you can do to demonstrate that through your CV and through your work experience, whatever that may be, is hugely valuable, because it means you're more hireable.
That sounds great. And Paul, what would you say about the cover letter or CV that really stood out for you during your career?
Yeah, I think in the position that I'm in, we do have a team of internal recruiters that will submit CVs over to you and things like that. So I see a huge amount of CVs, but it's probably going back about 10 years ago now. Yeah, probably about 10 years ago. And the best one I ever had was actually everyone knows that LinkedIn is utilised as a tool for networking. It enables recruitment to find candidates, but it also enables people to network in the industries that they want to target into. And I'd received this LinkedIn message from basically a degree graduate, an engineering degree graduate, and automatically it's a case of, oh, I'll always accept, there's something that I could probably help out with, or is there an event that we're approaching? And he just sent me an email over saying, I'd really like to speak to you. And I was like, yeah, no problems at all. And then probably about half an hour later, received this video. And the video that obviously he'd sent over to me was a full detailed description of him as an individual. It was edited within, like, I've never seen a video that's been edited this well. It was directed to me. It wasn't directed to the organization. So there's been a lot of time that gone into understanding what I recruit for, what we do as a business. And it was a really personalized video message that probably only went on for, I don't know, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, but it was enough for him to give me. So when we talk about, CVs, and we talk about put the main parts at the top, so you kind of cover letters and things like that. Essentially, it was a digitalized cover letter, but it told me enough about him within a minute and a half than I would do from just glazing over a CV. And that doesn't happen very often. I've probably had one or two maybe over the years. But it just so happened that we did take him on. He was actually a degree graduate in engineering that decided the career wasn't for him. He didn't want that hands-on experience. He was due to qualify, but had realised that, maybe being on an oil and gas site in the middle of nowhere and the cold wasn't for him. And had decided that he wanted to still utilise his skill sets, but venture into engineering in a slightly different way. He flew through the interviews. It was similar to what Nicola had said there. There was elements of his CV where he'd gone above and beyond. Certain people would just send a CV over. He sent a video. Certain people would be, going on holidays and traveling around the world, whereas he was constantly busy, had 4 jobs. So there was key things, but we actually took him on. And it just so happens that kind of 8 years down the line, he's still working for us and he manages people, and he's probably one of our highest performers in the organisation. So you'd probably cringe when I mention it, but that was probably the most, as I say, it is about, Nicola's mentioned there, it's about putting yourself out there. And arguably what I would say, it wasn't just down to the video and the digitalisation, it was the fact that he'd actually targeted me directly, as opposed to trying to go around the routes of the recruitment process. He wanted to be one step ahead, and as I say, that was a real success from myself. That's one that certainly does jump out at me.
So simply said, by taking that extra step, that extra time, putting some effort into your application, like you said, he sent the whole video covering his CV, so you wouldn't need to read it, and making it easier for you in the end. It made really stood out the candidate in the end.
Yeah,
that's great to hear. And then, Sophie, what would you say about that?
I think it's a tricky one, because I think CVs over the past 10 years have changed so much in sort of how people approach them. So if I was talking about the ones that have stood out to me, this sort of recruitment campaign that I've been looking through, it is exactly what Nicola said. It's the people that have got something different on there, and it's making it clear that they've pushed sort of themselves to the limit. So we had one guy this year who really stood out to me, who, similar to what Nicola said, he'd set up his own honey company, and he was selling honey, and he put his Instagram handle on his CV as well, which actually was a huge selling point for me, because it meant I could go and have a look at it and actually go on his Instagram page and see what he's been doing. And it made it even more exciting for me, because it meant I could actually see that he'd got a lot of followers. People were really buying this product, and it really made me realise that actually that was working. So at the moment, it's things like that really draw your attention, and you can actually sort of follow up with it and see what more information you can find, which is really, really fantastic. But I think if I look back prior to sort of social media being so a prevalent thing in terms of sort of applications, it is the people that have sort of had a variety of different roles. It's not people that have had life experience is fantastic, but those people that have really worked hard, and it might have been having multiple jobs. It could have been working at your supermarket for the past 8 years while you're doing your degree and part-time at the same time. It is people like that really stand out to me, because it shows that they've really worked hard and they've got that work ethic that really shows that they are committed to something. And someone who's got sort of 5 or 6 different jobs they've only had a couple of months in, it really sometimes makes me question, well, why did you leave? You know, if it was a part-time job at Sainsbury's, why have you gone on to work at Asda now? Why have you not sort of continued in the same organisation? Why are you chopping and changing? So often it is the people that have got quite longevity in one role that they've worked part-time, you know, for a long period of time, because it really makes me think you've really invested there. And, you know, I completely understand people do change jobs and, you know, they move around. But when someone's got sort of a list of so many, it's quite hard to understand why they've moved around as much as they have when it's a part-time role they're doing alongside university. So people that have got commitment is a big thing for me. Seeing that they've actually really committed to something is really fantastic.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting approach. Yes, thank you very much for your answer. And I would now like to move on to the next question. Which is overall, in your experience, Nicola, what has candidate done that made them stand out the most during an interview or an assessment day?
So I've been doing assessment days for years, and they are really intensive, and they involve a whole different stage. So we have written exercises, we have group exercises, we have presentations, we have interviews. We do the whole shebang, and I get involved in all of those different stages. But what I would say is that the ones that really stand out are the ones that prepare. And what I mean by prepare is, we know you've done your research on our organisation, you know who we are, you know who's interviewing you, because the worst scenario is somebody picks a topic for their presentation, which is my specialist area of the law, and they don't know it's my specialist area, because you can see their face go grey as you start having a conversation with them about the fact that you've acted for this company or that company in the particular area that they've chosen to speak about. So do your research, find out who's going to be interviewing you, find out everything you possibly can about them, find out what makes them tick, what they're good at. Do your research. It's so much easier now than it used to be. When I went for my first job and when I got my first position, I knew exactly who was interviewing me. I knew who their clients were. I knew where they shopped. I knew everything about them. So when I went in, I felt in a position of control. So I knew what they'd be looking for. I knew what made them tick. I knew how to flatter them, but without being facetious. I was totally prepared. And I think that came across with an air of confidence, not arrogance. And that's really what I'm looking for, is somebody that has paid enough attention and has given proper credence to the fact that we are spending our time trying to hire you. So make sure you know the law firm you're being hired by, or whatever company you're being hired by. Make sure you've asked the right questions. Don't be afraid to ask who's interviewing you. Don't be afraid to do your research, because if you don't do it, it will be pretty evident and it'll come across and we'll spot it pretty quickly. So what I would say is, candidates that are very prepared come across to me much, much better than ones that aren't. Do your preparation.
So in terms of that, I have a question. So if you do not know who's going to assess you during the assessment center day or whatever, is it a good idea to actually email the company and ask who will be the assessor, like some of the details?
Absolutely. If you don't ask, you don't get. Find out. Do your research. Ask them. If they don't tell you, what have you lost? You've lost nothing. I think you've really got to plan and think about it. Don't just sit back and leave it to chance, because the more you can prepare, the better you can think through what you're going to do and how you're going to tackle it, because you can play to your strengths if you're prepared. But it's the same in the day job. You know, I would never go and meet a client if I hadn't done my research on them. So I always find out who they are. I always find out what the connections are to the firm. I always find out if we've dealt with them in the past, if there's any prior relationships there. All that stuff is vital. So preparing is so important, but don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask them. Be cheeky. what have you got to lose? You know, I really wanted a job with a law firm when I was a student. And I went to their offices every week, and I took a handwritten application, and I handed it into them once a week, every week. I got a rejection letter back. So I went back and I did it again. And I kept writing to them, and I said, look, I really want to work with you, and this is why. And I'll work with you for free. I just want some work experience with you, and this is why. And they did give me work experience because I was persistent, and I didn't take no for an answer, but in a polite way. So there are things you can do. There are things you can do to make you stand out and just be different. But really show passion, show people that you care, show that you really want that job, and why you really want that job, and why you're the person that stands out, because that passion will come across, and it's infectious. If you really demonstrate that you were the right person for the job, you really want the job, and you've done your research, that'll come across in spades and be hired.
Right. Yeah, I personally heard of success stories that where the persistence leads to, and I have plenty of examples of students who were persistent with specific companies, who kept emailing them every single week, pretty much asking, are there any open roles and so on. And yeah, their CVs ended up to the highest levels of the company, to the C-suite people. And yeah, they got hired in the end just by being persistent. And that's a great example, I would say. Paul, a question for you. What can candidates do to make their applications more effective in light of current COVID situation?
Yeah, I think I'd say COVID has been a radical change in how businesses recruit and everything else that comes with it. You know, it's been shall we say, a shock to the system. In regards to the changing of a CV, arguably I would say that the same principles apply. You know, a CV to me has got to be, it's got to be stand out. It's got to have certain parts into it. You know, the amount of CVs that I see that are 7 pages long, and you know, it's one of those where you just look at them, and the first thing that you look at is what's the opening statement. You know, how people structure their CVs is really important to me. There used to be this craze where people would put images on and, you know, put fancy fonts on and all that type of stuff. For me, it's not about that. I think for me, I always work off from a CV. It's got to be, there's kind of, shall we say, 5 key areas. For me, a CV's got to be clear. When we talk about clear, is the most relevant information for that job. And I think every CV has got to be rewritten to direct towards that particular job, and not making a generic job profile. You know, arguably I'd say, and I don't know whether the rest of the panel would agree, that you can spot a CV that's been done by another business, a CV writing business, within a shot, straight off the bat. And the opening question is, tell me more about your CV. And arguably they don't really know what's in the CV because they haven't written it. So it does take that time to do it. So being clear and being precise with it, being accurate, so making sure that the spelling and grammar is right. It might seem like such a small thing, but it is something that will pout out there. Targeted, so, you know, when you're doing your opening statement, indicate why you think you'd be right for that business. And it boils down to what Nicola said before about, you've got to investigate before you submit a CV over to any business. You've got to understand that, is that business for you? Not every business is going to be right for every behavior. Not every culture within a business is going to be right for another. So really targeting your CV to a business that you want to work for, not a generic CV, because a generic one, you'll get a generic response. Needs to be concise. So the information in it needs to be really relevant and concise. And overall, what I would say is that when I'm wanting to see a CV, what I'm wanting to see is honesty. And, you know, the biggest thing to me, you know, if someone was to say to me, what do you like in people that you interview? The key thing to me is honesty. And what you will get from honesty is you will get, without them knowing or without them really truly feeling uptight about an interview, is that you can extract those kind of weaknesses. And a business, you know, that is looking at hiring graduates, we understand that we're going to have to work with you. We understand that there's going to be weak points. We understand that you're going to need experience and support. And those kind of CVs will illustrate towards how honest you're being. You know, it's not just a case of I've done this. Provide information, provide case studies of what you've done. You know, provide, you know, from a business point of view, what is it you've done? What effect did that have? What positive effect? Anyone can say that in a CV that, you know, I've done this and I've done that, but prove it.
Yeah.
You know, and be able to talk about it and be confident in talking about it. And again, boils down to what Nicola's just said there. If you have approached your CV in the right manner, if you understand what is in that CV, and you understand that you've done your due diligence on checking that business, then the chances are that CV is going to hit the mark. It's going to hit the triggers, and overall, you're not going to find yourself in sticky water, shall we say, further on down the line when you're trying to cover up patches on your CV that somebody else has written for you.
Thank you very much, Paul. So a question for Sophie. How can applicants convey that the research about the role or a company was overall effective?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question? I didn't fully hear that.
Sorry. So how can applicants convey that their research about the role or a company was effective?
I think in terms of that, it's a tricky one because, you know, going into the interview, the sort of the follow-up questions or the sort of the cover letter, you'd expect the questions that would be followed up from what they've said to indicate that the information they've researched is effective and accurate. I think with preparation for any sort of interview or assessment centre or anything like that, it's sort of doing the research and being confident that you sort of, you know, are comfortable with what you're saying. So if it's practicing talking that through with someone beforehand, just to sort of make sure that you're comfortable sharing what you've researched, because often sometimes what you find is in your head, it might sound perfect and you've really polished it. But if you haven't actually shared it with somebody else, it's quite sometimes difficult for them to follow it. And they might not fully understand what you've said. So I think in terms of the preparation, you know, to me, it's that practice aspect. So making sure that you are, you know, getting someone to quiz you a bit before the interview, before the assessment day, just so you're comfortable responding to questions. Because often I think sometimes people, you know, they think they're prepared and ready, but when it comes to sort of being quizzed quite a lot and, you know, follow-up questions and, you know, they want more information, it sort of throws people off. So I think that's one big tip I would give. And I really do sort of stress exactly what Nicola said about that preparation piece. So I work sort of for a consultancy firm. And I'll be really honest with this. One of the questions we ask is, how do we make money as a business? I can tell you now, 99% of people we ask that question to do not know the answer. They do not understand how a consultancy makes money. And that, for every assessor we have in the business, is so frustrating because they think, how can they not understand this? Why have they not done the research? Why is it so difficult to understand how we make money? And the responses are always so confused. It's never clear that they've prepared enough. You know, and I understand that people might be applying for multiple roles with different companies and things do get blurred, but you need to go in there and that question, to me, if you cannot answer that, why can't you answer it? Because you should know how we make money. You know, you should understand that, and it's really important that you've researched that. Yeah, and I think for me, like when I went and applied for my job with Turner & Townsend, I had to know the answer to that. You know, just because I'm not a graduate doesn't mean I'm any different. I still had to be able to answer that question, and it's, you know, it's really important to show that, you know, they could throw anything at you about the business, about anything. And it's just that confidence in responding to those questions, but also knowing that you have done the right research. And I always, to this day, even if I was going for an interview with a different company, I would always, you know, sit down with somebody and ask them to ask me questions about the business or just about my experience or whatever that might be, just to make sure that I'm ready for it. Because sometimes that feeling of being prepared on your own and sort of independently is completely different to actually being prepared when you are being, you know, ask those questions. And I think in terms of sort of the research and, you know, understanding what a company does, you know, share it with a friend, you know, get them to look at the website with you, you know, have those conversations with your peers, because sometimes they might be applying for a similar company, you know, or it might be that just good to just have a bit of a sounding board with somebody just to sort of discuss it. So, you know, they can see that you are fully understanding where things are going. So it's really important to be prepared. But I think doing that on your own is never going to work with an interview, especially at the moment when companies are interviewing so many people. You want to go in there and really impress them and look confident in how you respond to the questions. And doing that with a friend or a family member beforehand really, really will make that big difference, you know, to show that you are prepared properly.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. So before we move on to Q&A, I have one last question that I would like to ask everyone here on the panel. So how to get hired in a company that currently maybe does not have any open vacancies? So let's start with Nicola, maybe.
Okay, I genuinely think that if you're the right person, you put yourself in the right place, you can create a role for yourself. And I've demonstrated that throughout my career. And anyone that shows initiative will turn your head. So I've had people come to me and say, so junior people come to me and approach me and ask me for work experience. So people emailing me out of the blue saying, look, I've heard about what you do. I'm really interested in the fact you act for this company and that company. Can I just come and do some work experience with you? If someone reaches out to me and does that, I will always, I say that now, I will always try and accommodate them. And it's been really tough during COVID, but I've mentored students, I've mentored people that are looking for different career options. And I would say if you put yourself out there and you try and create the opportunities, the doors will open for you. My very first day when I had my training contract, a new partner had joined the law firm that I was working in, and he was really well respected in the market. He was top of his field in corporate law, and I wanted to be a corporate M&A lawyer, mergers and acquisitions. And I knocked on his door and I went in and I said, oh, really nice to meet you. I've heard lots about what you do. I'm really interested in what you do. I'd love to work with you. If you need any help, just let me know. And guess what? The next day I became his trainee, and he hired me, and I eventually ended up becoming a corporate lawyer. But I put myself out there and I knocked on the door and I wasn't afraid to do it. And I think it's really important to do that, because unless you show initiative, it just won't happen. Before I even got my training contract, I did temping work. So I did temping work as a receptionist for National Resources Wales, which is the Environment Agency. I'd never done temping work before. I didn't know how to work a switchboard. I didn't have a clue, but I did it. And I learnt fast. And the head of legal there was a guy called Rick Navarro, I'll never forget. And every morning he used to come in and pick up the Post and grab the newspaper and walk up to his office. And I used to say, good morning, Mr. Navarro, how are you? How's your day? You've got a busy day? Are you busy? What's going on? And over the course of 3 months, I managed to get in the conversation. 1, I was a law graduate. 2, I knew what court proceedings were. 3, if I could type 80 words a minute. 4, if you needed someone to do bundles, I'd be there and I'd do it. And then guess what? One day he came in and he said, look, I'm working on the Sea Empress disaster, which is a huge environmental prosecution. I need some extra hands. Do you want to come upstairs and help me? And guess what? I made my own job. So I created a job, and then I ended up working part-time for their procurement team in Cardiff for a year when I came back to do my postgrad. So what I would say is I created that job for myself, just putting myself out there and just by saying, hey, if you need help, give me a shout. And I was literally sat on the reception desk. So I wasn't in a legal role at all. So I think even if there's no role immediately, if you put yourself out there and you create opportunities for yourself, you will find a role and people will hire you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Nicola. Paul, what are your thoughts on that specifically?
Yeah, I think there's kind of 2 areas to this for me. Is that I think there needs an element of targeting businesses that you want to work with, and it boils down to again about that looking at culture, looking at how that business represents itself, looking at the ED&I policies and everything else. And once you're kind of confirmed that you know the type of business that you want to work for, then the chances are that you'll be more inclined to really focus on driving and wanting to work for that organization. I think that's the first thing. And secondly, obviously, we were mentioning this before the call. One thing at Hays that we managed to see is that we managed to see the full UK market and what it looks like. Obviously, I look after technical and engineering. However, one thing to stipulate is that we're hearing in the press that there's lots of people that are being made redundant and everything else, and arguably that is the case, and that sits in hospitality, which has been massively affected by what's going on. And we'd never look back maybe 5 years ago and say that hospitality would be hit as hard as it has done. So yes, there is redundancies. But what we're also seeing within the technical and engineering market and in the perm market alone is that we're seeing more jobs now being advertised with organisations than there was in 2015. And I suppose the answer to that really is that throughout COVID, what you have seen is what we call the handbrake and acceleration effect. And what it means is that businesses have really had to put the handbrake on because they don't know what's happening, what's the effect going to be on their business and everything else. And now what we're seeing is this acceleration. So as I say, we've seen within the engineering sector alone, we've seen 170% increase in roles. And over the whole of the UK, so every skill set possible, we are seeing a 30% increase in jobs, which is really, really significant. And that's only over the last quarter. So what I would say there is that question to me 6 months ago would be a completely different answer. Yeah. Whereas now it just shows you how much the industry does move on and how it does adapt to recessions. And arguably, I would say that from a technical and engineering perspective is that it normally bodes well within recessions. We always need gas, electricity. We always need buildings. We always need utilities, water, and everything else. So it does have a habit to stabilize quite well in recessions. But again, as I say, if you were to ask me this question 6 months ago, it would be a very different answer. Whereas now it is looking very positive. And for the people who we've got watching today, arguably what I would say is that you're going to see a lot more opportunity, and there'll be less doors locked, and slightly more either ajar or wide open for talent.
Thank you very much, Paul. And Sophie, so what are your thoughts on this question?
I think it's a tricky one because I sort of see this in two areas. But I really do agree with what Paul just said, that the business I work in exactly followed that approach. They really did put the handbrake on, and now it's all go, go, go. And I think in terms of how busy the business is now, it's busier than ever, and we're sort of winning work left, right, and centre because so much is happening. So I do really agree with exactly what Paul just said there, that the difference I've seen in the past 6 months is completely polar opposite to where we were 6 months ago. It's scary how things have changed. I think for me, if we're not advertising any vacancies, I think there's two different ways you can approach this. We do get candidates that send a generic CV and sort of say, I'm looking for an opportunity. Do you have anything available? And obviously they will get a generic response back to sort of say, no, we don't have any opportunities, because they're sending it to sort of a generic inbox. They're sending it to the wrong sort of place. For me, just sending that to my team isn't going to get them anywhere really, because we have a standard response we have to say. If they can find someone quite senior in the business and directly approach them with something that's, going to actually impress them, it's a completely different thing. Because if a senior director came to me saying, I've been sent this CV, it's fantastic, we need to meet with this person, they can sort of overrule everything that I would sort of do because they're really impressed by them and they want to interview them, they want to meet them. Whereas what I deliver in my team is I run graduate recruitment. I have to be fair and consistent to every single person that approaches me directly. We have to follow that approach. So if you are sending emails to generic inboxes, you have to appreciate that they will get flooded with emails daily from different people. But if you really are serious about this, it's actually finding somebody who, in a sense, is going to have your back and really want to actually get you into that business. Because, the recruitment teams, they're completely flooded by interest in applications. You're just a number. You're not going to be any different. Whereas if you actually can find a contact, they're more likely to come and say, look, we really want to meet this person. What can we do? How can we get them in? What are the options? Because they're going to actually, be a bit of a cheerleader for them, because they can see that, that how fantastic they are. So I think it's looking at it like that. You've got to really, approach this correctly. That's how I would sort of look at it. But I also do think as well, if you're bigger companies, will have more sort of red tape, because it's just how they tend to work. If you are really struggling to find an opportunity, looking at, when you're looking to do something now, or, when a lot of applications are closed, smaller companies are more likely to be able to take you on if it's for work experience or whatever that is, just because they might have more flexibility around that. Whereas if you are approaching very big organizations, they will get inundated with interest. And often it's around, they'll have processes, they'll have set ways they have to go through these things. But if you do sort of desperately want something now, if you are looking at maybe more smaller local firms, you might get more a more of a chance really with them, because they might not get the same uptake from students. So they're my sort of tips is, if you're looking to try and get into a big firm, you need to find someone who's high profile enough to sort of read your CV and be impressed by it. But if you are just sort of desperately looking for that work experience opportunity, maybe looking for some like a smaller organisation that might not take on hundreds of graduates a year, but might take on a small set, you've probably got more chance of getting in there, because they might have more flexibility of taking on an extra person rather than big companies who get thousands and thousands of applications.
Yeah, that honestly sounds really, really great overall. So thank you very much, Sophie, for your answer. Now I believe it's time to move on to the Q&A session, as we have quite a few questions overall given throughout the session. So one of the questions is from Neil Reynolds, and he asked, what are your tips for moving from the private sector to the public sector and vice versa? So anyone has tips? Yeah, Nicola? Go ahead.
So I think it does depend what your in what sort of role or capacity. So from a legal perspective, a private sector lawyer is normally quite different to a public sector lawyer, but I've done both. So whilst working in a private sector law firm, I've been seconded in-house to the public sector. So I worked in-house for the Royal Mint for 5 years in their new business division. And we looked at the future of cashless society and blockchain payments and all that really exciting stuff. So what I would say is my transition in was fairly easy because it was seconded in. And I think once you get into a public sector organisation, it's quite easy to stay there for quite a long period of time. It tends to be less cutthroat, I guess, than private sector is what I would say, because in the private sector, a lot of the businesses are owned by the people that will be hiring you, so it's the cash. Whereas in the public sector, it's not quite that way. So it's different budgets and cost centers and stuff. It all comes down to money at the end of the day. But I would say you can move from public sector to private sector and vice versa. It's quite difficult then to go back into the private sector once you've been in public sector. That's my experience. Certainly as a lawyer, because the reason people hire you is because of your book of business. It's your client base. So if you spend a very long period of time in-house, you lose your client base because other people have come in and have taken all those clients. So you've got to build that book up from scratch. So it's quite difficult to transition from one to the other, but it's not impossible. You can certainly do it. But I mean, that's my experience as a lawyer. But again, I think it does vary from role to role.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd just add from an engineering point of view, I think, there is a transition over from private to public sector. I'd agree with Nicola that I think once you've made that move over into the public sector, that not necessarily is it an easier environment. It's certainly not. There's still high pressures and everything else, but people will make a conscious effort to want to work in the public sector. Whether that brings with them security and everything else. And that is a key part to it. So you can transition over, but arguably what I would say from an engineering point of view is we very rarely see people come back out of the public sector into the private sector from an engineering perspective.
That's great.
Just sort of in terms of my experience, I worked for public sector organisations prior to working in a private business, and there is a real big difference there. And I think exactly what sort of Nicola said, from working in a public sector organisation for a long time, it's very, very different in terms of money, how things are spent and the questions that are asked around that. And obviously it's public money you're spending, whereas in a private business, money is very, very important because often it's the people who are sort of letting you do things, it's their money you're spending. So there's often a lot more questions around that. And I do think it is, I've worked in both. And I think from my experience of it, it is probably, I do work harder now, if I'm really, really honest. I'm expected to work longer hours. There is a lot more pressure on me in terms of deliverables, whereas in the public sector, it felt more around, you know, it was a very, very different environment. But
Mm.
would I go back? I probably would. Yeah, I probably would at some point. But I think it's going back at the right point, because I think, like sort of Paul said there, I think it is very, very difficult to make the move back into the private sector at that point, because I think it's more of it's such a difference. You really do see how different they are.
All right, thank you very much. Another question is from Carolyn Gaston. She asked, do you place a lot of value on an individual's volunteering experiences on CVs?
I absolutely do. I think work experience and volunteering is really important. And so I act as a non-exec director for a pro bono for Business in Focus, who provide business support to companies all over Wales. And I think it's vital that you give back. You know, I do mentoring and all sorts of things. I think volunteering on your CV is great, and if you can demonstrate you've done that, it says something about you. I think it's really important, and I think anything that you can do to demonstrate that you actually care about society and the community that you work and live in, it is good. So yes, I would be a big fan of volunteering on your CV. Yes.
I think from sort of where I sit with this, it just shows that people are quite a well-rounded individual, because it shows they've got a variety of different skills, that they've actually they're wanting to do different things and sort of build that sort of personal profile to me. So I think it's so important, because it shows that you've got a variety of strings to your bow. Really, it's not just that you are someone who's got a degree in whatever. You have got other things to talk about, and to me that's why it's so important, because it just shows you're quite diverse in terms of what you've done over the past few years. So yeah, it's so important. And even if it is just a short period of time you've done something for, it still shows you've given up your time to do something for other people or for the community or whatever that might be. So please do make sure you share that on your CV, because it does really make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd agree that, you know, from a volunteer point of view, I think it's quite easy to have the idea that you want to volunteer, but to actually follow it through and have the confidence to walk into, you know, whether that's helping the homeless or whatever, you know, it's eating into your own time. You've got to kind of want to do it. You know, you can't do volunteering. You know, I'm a trustee for the UTC, the University Training College. And I do that because I care about STEM, and I care about students, and I care about helping and supporting, you know, students come through the technical and engineering, the STEM market. So again, as I say, it's not something that I'm paid for, but it's absolutely something I'm massively passionate about. And I would never remove that. So for me, if I'm looking at someone who has gone out of their way to support and help other people and the community, then absolutely 100% would have a big tick in the box for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your answers. Another question has been asked by Irais Baizabal. So he asked, what characteristics are important to you for a manager position? What do you expect to see from a manager? Maybe.
I think obviously I'll go first if you don't mind. I think for me, it's I think from a manager point of view, I think to be a successful manager, I think there is an element where you've got to understand the job, and you've got to essentially be an expert in the job role that you perform. And what I mean by that is that people who are going to be coming through into your teams, coming to manage it, they are going to be looking at you not only for support day to day on doing the job, but they're also going to look at nicer ways to do things, or you know, easier ways to perform a particular role. The other characteristic to me is being a leader. It's being somebody who can lead and influence. But I think also the biggest thing I would say is being able to listen. You know, it's being able to kind of talk to your staff and understand. You know, arguably what I would say throughout this COVID scenario is that one thing we've been really focused on is the well-being of our staff. And arguably, I would say that some people are, you know, aren't forthcoming with their feelings, and other people may be more forthcoming. And we have to be, as a leader, we have to make sure that, you know, we may not have the answers, and the answers might be externally outside of work. But the one thing that you would hope is that you could at least provide balance and an understanding of what they're going through, and be there and listen. Sometimes what they want you to do is just listen. So I think being a good listener in management is far, far greater than most skill sets.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on that? No? Okay.
I would echo what Paul said, and also say team play. So evidence in your CV you're a team player, because if all of your hobbies and all of your activities and all of your roles show you're an individual and you do things alone. So you run, you read, you bake. That's not a team activity. So demonstrate that you like working with a team, because if you're going to manage a team, you've got to bring people along with you, and you've got to tell them why. You've got to explain to people why you need to do something, and because unless people come on that journey with you, they won't do it. They won't deliver. So demonstrating that you can be part of a team and you can persuade people to your view is really important.
Thank you very much. And minding our time, it will be the last question throughout our today's session. I found it really interesting. It was a pre-submitted question by Mehmet Mustafa. And he asked, if one is held back by an obstacle, such as having some type of a disability, which potentially makes him or her less attractive for majority of the companies, what would be your suggestion for that person to break through such a barrier or obstacle?
I think it does depend on what the obstacle is, but a lot of big corporations now are actively focusing on positive discrimination and helping people into roles where they may not have had the same opportunity as other people. So that could be for a whole host of reasons, but big companies have the budgets and the space and the ability to help people train and overcome whatever those restrictions may be it English is not your first language, be it you have a physical disability, be it any sort of criteria that you think might prejudice you. But you know, there are don't ever be afraid to go for the job that you want to go for, because if you're the right candidate, people will help you and support you through that. Getting diversity and equality in the workplace is hugely important for businesses, because if we all look the same, we all sound the same, what a boring place that's going to be to work. Nobody wants that. You know, by creating a diverse workforce, you get so much more insight and so much more creativity and positivity, and it completely changes the culture and the way that businesses work. So what you might actually find is that might actually be a positive for you rather than a negative.
Yeah, and from an ED&I point of view, it's something that I'm hugely passionate about, and as an organisation, you know, it's a key objective for us. It's also worthwhile as well, when you are investigating businesses that you want to possibly work for, start to look at their ED&I policies, start to read about them, start to understand what they are. Certain businesses are far further ahead with the ED&I policy, whereas others may be slightly behind. That doesn't mean that they don't care about it. It's just the fact that, you know, they are in a particular position. You know, there is other websites as well that you can go onto. So there's a website called Vercida that is heavily focused on ED&I recruitment. So what you can do on Vercida, it's nothing to do with Hays by any stretch of the imagination. It's something that we are glad to partner with. However, what they will do is they will break down all of the businesses that are advertising and give you a scoring of what their ED&I policies are and how they perform to those policies. So if you are somebody who has got a disability, you can easily open up and start to see some businesses that would actually be welcoming of whatever that disability may be, and understanding and be able to get that balance right within the organisation. But there is a lot of focus from large corporates like ourselves to smaller businesses that, you know, a good working and diverse workforce is the way to go. And I've certainly seen it within my business that That balance is absolutely perfect. And as I say, we've still got a lot to go, I would say, as an organisation and as an industry and as a country. We've still got a long way to go. But from what I'm seeing, there is some positive root causes and there's positive actions happening across the industry at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great. Thank you very much. Sophie, I believe, do you have anything?
I think with my opinion on that is I think it's really important to, with the organisations you're applying for, talking it through and trying to explain as much as you can around what the disability is so they can fully understand how they can support you. And we get a lot of candidates that sort of come to us with a disability, so they need sort of adjustments with the sort of the assessments that we run, and we are really happy to accommodate that. But I think sometimes some candidates, if I'm really honest, they're a bit embarrassed to actually talk about it because they think it is going to have a negative impact before they even get into the process. We will try our best to be as accommodating as we can if you share the details with us. And I know sometimes it can be quite personal and you might not want to, but we are all trained to listen and understand these things. So please don't feel that we can't talk to you. And if it's that you'd rather have a phone call with somebody rather than doing it on email or vice versa, whatever you'd prefer, most organizations will try their best to be accommodating around that. And also, if you're looking to apply for a business and you think that's going to put like a blocker in before you even submit your application, maybe reach out and have a conversation before you submit the application so they can maybe try and look at how they could adapt or what they could do to sort of try and be more inclusive and try and be more supportive rather than you just submitting it and being amongst everybody else. Because sometimes, if I'm really honest, if you are applying to a large company and they get a large number of applications, if you've not sort of drawn attention to yourself, you might just sort of get pulled into everybody else. Whereas if you are explaining what you find difficult, they might be able to put you in contact with someone who can support you through the process a bit more or help you with that, so it'll make it a bit easier for you and make you feel a bit more comfortable. So don't ever be embarrassed to share the details with businesses, because they will try their best to be as helpful and accommodating as they can. Because I always say this to everybody: we're not trying to trick people, we're not trying to catch them out, we're not trying to scare anybody. We're looking for people who are the right fit for our business. And I think, it's really important that you see us all, we're not scary people who sit behind the desk sort of screening your applications and CVs. We're all really approachable. And most people who do work in recruitment are really people that are really people orientated. So most of the time they will be willing to have a conversation and they do understand because they've probably done something similar before. So do really approach the team. And, I speak to so many people all the time with situations like this, and we always try our best to do what we can. So, it might not always be a perfect response, but we can do something, I'm sure of it. So please do approach us and sort of ask to help, because we want to help if we can.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for this answer. And overall, thank you so much for taking the time to present and answer various employability-related questions today, which I believe will be highly beneficial for today's attendees. And now I would like to pass the stage to Natasha.
Thank you very much. So that's it for this afternoon's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, Armin, for taking on the role of host for today's session. And thank you, Sophie, Paul, and Nicola, for your insights and expertise. If you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. A few of you mentioned mentoring. This is one of the services you can access through Management Direct. And if you're not yet a member, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. So please do take a few moments to complete the evaluation form. As mentioned earlier, this is, if you complete it by 9 a.m. on Monday, the 29th of March, you will receive a free CMI goodie bag, and you'll also be entered into a prize draw for a £100 Amazon gift card. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.